The desert sky was wide and unbroken, a sheet of pale blue stretching over Nevada's barren ridges. Heat shimmered above the tarmac, and the radio cut through the still air with desperate urgency. Mayday, Mayday. A pilot's voice cracked across the frequency, then cut into silence. For a moment, every headset in the operations center was filled with nothing but static. Then, someone whispered a name, not as a report, but as a fragment of memory. Silent Hawk. The words floated like superstition, a ghost story retold among pilots who had heard of impossible landings and vanishing rescues. Most dismissed it, the way soldiers dismiss myths when they have checklists to follow and procedures to enforce. Legends were for late-night talk, not for flight lines under the hard desert sun. Down on the ramp, Reina Vasquez knelt beneath the belly of an F-16, her clipboard balanced against her knee as she checked hydraulic lines for the second time. She was 28 years old, with sun-browned skin from years spent outdoors, shoulder-length brown hair pulled back into a plain ponytail, and eyes that never seemed to miss detail. Her uniform was regulation perfect, clean but marked with wear along the knees and sleeves where fabric rubbed against hot metal and fuel-stained panels. She had the lean build of someone who climbed ladders, hauled toolboxes, and crawled through tight service bays for 12-hour shifts. On paper, she was a maintenance technician. To the pilots she served, she was little more than a wrench turner. Lieutenant Morrison passed by with the swagger of a man in a flight suit and called back over his shoulder, "Make sure you didn't leave any bolts loose in my engine." Vasquez. His tone was half joke, half dismissal. Reina only looked up from her notes and replied evenly, "Everything is secure, sir. Safe flight." Morrison laughed as though he had earned the last word and moved toward the cockpit. His wingman muttered that at least she knew her place. Around them, other pilots carried on, helmets under their arms, pre-flight chatter bouncing between them with the careless rhythm of men certain the world revolved around their altitude. Reina, standing just behind the line, might as well have been invisible. She never answered back, never complained, never allowed irritation to crack through her quiet surface. She arrived before dawn, stayed long after sunset, and treated every checklist as though someone's life depended on it. While others signed off once the basics were complete, she rechecked control surfaces, fuel lines, radar calibration. She paid attention in meetings where enlisted personnel sat at the back, her eyes fixed not on the clock, but on the mission maps and flight patterns spread across the screen. Pilots wondered aloud why she cared about training sorties when she would never fly them. No one bothered to ask what she saw, or what she knew. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran of 2 decades on the flight line, noticed what others ignored. He watched the way she lifted her head when jets roared into afterburner, how her gaze followed them with something more than admiration. "That's not a girl looking at pretty airplanes," he told his assistant quietly. "That's someone who knows exactly what it feels like up there." The younger man only shrugged. To him, she was just another tech with a spotless clipboard. Rodriguez shook his head and kept watching. Legends. He knew. Never announced themselves. They walked quietly, carrying the weight of memory, waiting for the one moment the rest of the world would finally see them. The morning began with the desert sky as clear as glass. Heat shimmered across the tarmac while 6 F-16s prepared for their training sortie. Engines howled in sequence, afterburners lighting one by one as each jet rolled into position. Ground crew stood ready with clipboards and toolkits, watching the ritual they had seen countless times before. Reina Vasquez checked off the final items for Falcon 6, Captain James Wheeler's jet, before stepping back with her usual quiet precision. Nothing seemed out of place. Morrison's jet thundered down the runway, followed by the others, orange plumes cutting through the blue air. One by one, the fighters lifted cleanly, their wings slicing upward into formation. The 5th jet roared skyward on schedule, but something faltered as Falcon 6 accelerated. A cough of smoke streaked from the exhaust, thin at first, then darker. Wheeler's voice crackled over comms with the strained calm of a man who understood engines were failing beneath him. Falcon 6. Engine anomaly. Aborting takeoff. By the time the words left his mouth, the aircraft was already airborne, nose fighting to climb while smoke poured in a widening trail. Control surfaces jittered under the strain, and within seconds the calm voice fractured. Falcon 6. Complete engine failure. Attempting emergency landing. The line broke into static. The jet, now a wounded silhouette, staggered against the Nevada horizon. On the ground, silence fell heavy. Ground crew stared upward, horror tightening their throats. Master Sergeant Rodriguez whispered that they had just lost Wheeler. Emergency vehicles screamed toward the far end of the runway, sirens thin against the roar of circling fighters above. Morrison's voice requested search permission, but control denied him. Too dangerous, they said. The terrain was mountainous, the smoke dense. Every face on the flight line carried the resignation of men and women trained to recognize when survival was impossible. Raina did not speak. Her clipboard shook once in her grip. Then her knuckles tightened until the edges bent. Around her, men muttered that nothing could be done now. She dropped the clipboard, its metallic clatter sharp in the stillness, and began running. At first, no one understood. Then voices rose in confusion as she sprinted across the hot concrete toward a spare F-16 fueled and ready for emergencies. Sergeant Martinez shouted for her to stop. Security warnings blared over the radios. She did not break stride. Reaching the equipment rack, she hauled a flight suit over her uniform with practiced economy. The helmet snapped into place as though it belonged to her by right. She climbed the ladder, swung into the cockpit, and her hands moved over switches with the certainty of repetition long hidden. Fuel pumps engaged, turbines whined, the engine roared alive. Major Thompson's voice broke across the net, ordering the unidentified pilot to abort immediately. Airmen rushed forward, too late to block the taxiing jet. Tires squealed, nose wheel aligned with the runway centerline, and the throttle slid forward to military power. Control barked frantic orders. Unknown aircraft, you are not cleared for takeoff. Abort, immediately. No acknowledgement came. The jet screamed down the runway, afterburner igniting in a twin blast that shook the air and drove heat across the flight line. She rotated cleanly, lifting skyward with a smoothness that betrayed far more than stolen bravado. The tower called again, voice cracking now with disbelief. Identify yourself. Who is in that aircraft? For the first time, her voice cut through, calm, level, undeniable. This is Silent Hawk, airborne and en route to crash site. Every headset went silent. Pilots high above broke formation, stunned into stillness. Master Sergeant Rodriguez dropped the wrench from his hand, metal clanging against concrete. The legend whispered in ready rooms was suddenly alive again, rising on a column of fire into the wide desert sky. The word hung in the air like a flare against the dark. Silent Hawk, spoken not as a rumor this time, but as a clear call sign over the emergency frequency. In the operations center at Nellis, the room froze. Controllers stared at their radar scopes, the green pulse sweeping across screens that now tracked an F-16 climbing steadily toward the mountains. Headset microphones hovered near mouths, but no one spoke. Major Thompson felt his throat dry out. He had mocked the ground crew for years, and now the voice of a ghost, calm and composed, was echoing from one of their cockpits. Above the desert, 5 F-16s circled in rigid formation, but their discipline cracked the moment the voice came through. Morrison whispered on the secure channel. Did she just say, Silent Hawk? No one answered at first. Then another pilot muttered what all of them were thinking. That call sign belongs to a legend, not a maintenance tech. For a long moment, their cockpits felt smaller, the desert sky too wide, as if the myth they had dismissed was flying in their midst. Colonel Patricia Hayes entered the operations center, her face taut as she scanned the display. Major Thompson stumbled through his report, insisting it had to be some mistake. But the calm cadence of Reyna's voice kept breaking through the static, issuing altitude corrections, adjusting vectors as though turbulence were nothing. Hayes leaned over the console, her eyes narrowing. "Silent Hawk," she repeated slowly. "I thought that call sign was struck from records years ago." In the circling orbit, the pilots held their comms in strained silence as they watched the lone jet carve a path towards storm banks gathering over the mountains. Lightning flickered inside the clouds, but Reyna's fighter threaded the air currents with precision, climbing and banking at angles that spoke of deep familiarity with the aircraft. She rode downdrafts with a feather touch, anticipating shifts before they caught her. Every move displayed a mastery none of them had expected, least of all from the woman who had handed them tools at dawn. On the ground, the crew who had watched her every day stood in disbelief. One airman whispered, "She was invisible yesterday. Now she's the one they tell stories about." Master Sergeant Rodriguez only nodded grimly. He had suspected she carried something the rest could not see. The clipboard she had dropped still lay on the concrete, abandoned at the moment she chose to reveal who she truly was. Storm clouds churned over the ridges, their shadows falling across the desert floor. The radar pulse swept again, showing her jet steady, unwavering. In that heavy silence, the myth ceased to be a story and became flesh and steel. The maintenance technician dismissed as background noise was Silent Hawk, alive, airborne, and guiding her jet toward the impossible. The operations center was thick with tension as the radar sweep traced the lone fighter through storm-wrapped mountains. No one spoke until Major Thompson muttered that he had found something. His hands shook as he fed a series of commands into the secure terminal. Pulling from a directory, few had clearance to access. A file appeared, its cover sheet stamped with bold red letters that declared it classified. He swallowed hard before reading aloud. "Silent Hawk, Captain Reyna Vasquez." Colonel Hayes leaned closer, her eyes narrowing as the file scrolled across the screen. Photographs in black and white flickered past, grainy images of raptors streaking over desert terrain, briefing notes with entire paragraphs redacted, casualty reports tucked between mission summaries. The numbers themselves told a story no one in that room had expected. 17 confirmed air-to-air kills, 43 deep strike missions flown into hostile airspace. Every sortie completed with 0 friendly losses under her command until the day her wingman failed to return. The radio crackled, her voice filtering through static, pilot conscious but injured, establishing landing zone. The tone was steady, but in the pause that followed her report, something heavier bled through. Major Thompson glanced up from the screen, then back again. According to this, she was declared missing in action 3 years ago during Operation Iron Storm, presumed dead. Hayes took the microphone in both hands, her voice level but edged with disbelief. "Silent Hawk, confirm identity. Are you Captain Reyna Vasquez?" There was a long silence. Then her voice came back, softer now. "Affirmative. This is Captain Vasquez, though I haven't worn that rank in 3 years." The air in the room seemed to thin. Thompson stared as if the console itself might vanish. Around them, enlisted controllers sat frozen in their chairs, hearing the weight of something that had lived beside them unnoticed. Her transmission continued, almost reluctant. "My aircraft was hit by a surface-to-air missile over Syria. I ejected, survived 6 days on the ground before extraction. My wingman, Captain Sarah Chen, went down in the same attack. She didn't make it." That was the moment when her voice broke slightly. Not in volume, but in cadence. Each word measured with pain. I carried her memory into every cockpit after that. I could not do it anymore. Every time I looked at the sky, I saw her jet burning. Hayes lowered her head, eyes on the black and white mission photos still frozen on the monitor. They showed jets banking over barren landscapes, soldiers on the ground waving as raptors thundered overhead. There was no sign of Sarah Chen except for a casualty line, her name typed cleanly in the corner of a report. To Raina. That line had become a shackle she could not escape. Her voice again. I asked for discharge from special operations. Couldn't live in the cockpit with that weight. They erased the rest of me. Maintenance was quiet, invisible. It was the only place I could keep working without being asked who I used to be. The silence in the operations center grew heavier. Every headset wire dangling from the consoles felt like a lifeline connecting them to a ghost who had walked among them unnoticed. For 3 years they had seen her with a clipboard and spotless coveralls, never once imagining that she had once guided raptors through missile fields. Survivor's guilt had turned her into a shadow, and yet here she was, alive, flying, and carrying the burden of a past too heavy to speak aloud until this moment. Sometimes survival, Rodriguez thought quietly to himself, is harder than death. The jagged ridges of the Nevada mountains stretched like broken teeth beneath her canopy, shadows thrown long by storm clouds still curling in the distance. Raina flew tight search patterns, her eyes fixed on the torn line of smoke rising from the valley floor. Each pass cut lower, the F-16 shuddering as shifting winds clawed at its wings. Then she saw it. Wheeler's aircraft lay broken across a scree slope, metal twisted, cockpit half buried in rock and dirt. The radio carried nothing but static until his weak voice cracked through, conscious, injured, losing blood. Her options narrowed to one. There was no road, no flat stretch of highway, nothing but a patch of clearing wedged between sharp valley walls. For most pilots it would be suicide. But Raina banked hard, throttle easing, her voice calm as she reported coordinates. Preparing landing. Stand by. Controllers at Nellis froze at her words. An F-16 was not built for this, and yet her descent was exact, each correction anticipating the way crosswinds spun between the cliffs. Engines roared as she flared, tires hammering onto uneven dirt. The jet bucked, stones snapping under its weight, and for a heartbeat it seemed certain to roll. Raina held firm, hands steady, riding the momentum until the fighter shuddered into stillness. Silence rushed in, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal. Against every expectation, she had put an F-16 down where only a helicopter should have dared. She was out of the cockpit in seconds, helmet under one arm, emergency kit in the other. Wheeler lay pale amid the wreckage, his flight suit torn, blood staining the fabric at his leg. Raina knelt, hands moving with practiced precision, airway clear, pulse faint but present. She plied a tourniquet, packed gauze, murmuring calm instructions to keep him conscious. Her voice was low but unwavering, the same tone she had once carried into combat. The smoldering wreckage crackled behind her as she keyed her transmitter. This is Silent Hawk. Pilot is alive. Leg fracture and blood loss. Coordinates transmitting. Landing zone marked. She planted a beacon light from her kit, its amber glow pulsing against the jagged walls of stone. In that narrow clearing, amid the smell of smoke and scorched earth, she had carved out a sanctuary for the rescue teams racing to her signal. Controllers at Nellis listened in silence, disbelief giving way to awe. On the mountainside, Raina kept one hand on Wheeler's shoulder, steadying his breath, while the other adjusted the beacon's angle. Courage had not left her. It had only been waiting for the moment when no one else could act. In the stillness after the impossible landing, Silent Hawk proved she had never truly vanished. The thrum of rotor blades carried across the narrow valley as the rescue helicopter hovered, its downwash scattering ash and dust around the smoldering wreckage. Raina shielded her face and stepped back, watching as medics lifted Wheeler onto a stretcher and guided him into the cabin. His hand twitched once in her direction before he vanished inside. She gave a single nod, then turned toward her own jet, the beacon still flashing against the rocks. Moments later, her F-16 roared back into the sky, the mountains falling away beneath her as she pointed the nose toward Nellis. The desert stretched endless and empty, heat shimmer rolling off the sand as the fighter cut across the horizon. No radio chatter followed her. She flew alone, the sound of the engine steady in her ears, a reminder of the rules she had broken and the life she had saved. When the base came into view, she lowered altitude, throttling back, the landing gear dropping with a mechanical groan. On the flight line, every pilot, every mechanic, every officer stood assembled. Word had spread. From tower personnel to ground crew, the base gathered in silence as the jet touched down, tires striking asphalt with a scream before rolling to a controlled stop. Heat haze rippled across the runway as the canopy lifted. Military police waited in neat formation, their presence sharp against the blur of watching faces. Reyna climbed out, helmet under one arm, flight suit streaked with dirt from the mountain clearing. She descended the ladder slowly, boots hitting the tarmac with a sound that seemed to echo louder than the jet cooling behind her. The silence of the crowd pressed in, not hostile, but reverent, disbelief having shifted into something weightier. Colonel Hayes stepped forward, expression stern, voice cutting through the still air. "Captain Vasquez, you saved a life today, but you also violated more regulations than I can count. Unauthorized takeoff, theft of government property, breach of classified history." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Every eye remained fixed on Reyna. Reyna did not flinch. She set the helmet gently on the ground, then met Hayes's gaze with steady calm. "Yes, ma'am." There was no argument, no plea, no attempt at defense, only acknowledgement, spoken with the same quiet authority that had carried her call sign back into the world. Around them, the crowd remained frozen. Pilots who had once called her wrench turner now silent in the face of what they had witnessed. Hayes studied her for a long moment, torn between discipline and the knowledge of what she had just seen. Behind them, the desert sun pressed down, the runway shimmering, the smell of jet fuel and hot asphalt mingling with dust. In that moment, discipline and defiance coexisted not in words, but in the silence that bound everyone present. Reyna stood alone before authority, unbowed, accepting whatever consequence would follow. The debriefing room was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Manila folders lay spread across the table, their pages stamped with classification markings that should never have been opened in a standard investigation. Colonel Hayes sat at the head of the table, her uniform immaculate, while Major Thompson shifted uncomfortably across from her. He kept glancing down at the reports as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. 17 confirmed air-to-air kills, 43 deep strike missions, multiple unconventional landings executed under fire. The file read like a legend stitched together from war stories. And yet the name printed on every page was the same woman he had dismissed as a wrench turner. Thompson finally exhaled, his voice low and strained. "This is unreal. She was right there among us." I treated her like he stopped, shame tightening his jaw. Colonel Hayes did not look at him. Her eyes remained on the folders, then on Reyna Vasquez, seated across the table. Reyna sat upright, flight suit clean but unadorned, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her expression betrayed nothing, though her eyes flicked toward the ceiling as if the weight of those words was heavier than the silence around them. She had not asked for this, had not wanted it, dragged back into daylight. But the truth was written in classified ink now spread before them. Hayes closed the folder with deliberate calm. "Captain Vasquez, you understand the situation. You stole a fighter jet. You violated direct orders. You revealed classified history." She leaned forward, voice sharp and measured. "I have 3 options: court-martial, discharge, or reinstatement." The words hung in the air. Reyna swallowed once, then spoke softly. "I am not fit for combat duty. I lost my wingman. I still see it every time I close my eyes. Sarah Chen died because I could not bring her home." She shook her head, voice tightening. "I will not be honored for surviving when she did not. Thompson shifted, uneasy, but Hayes did not waver. Her tone softened, though it lost none of its authority. I am not asking you to go back into combat. You would not be flying deep strike missions again. What I want is for you to teach. Instructor pilot. Advanced rescue operations. Training others to land where no one else dares. To keep their people alive. That is not glory. Captain, that is service. Raina hesitated. She looked down at her hands, then at the untouched coffee mug on the table. The doubt in her voice was almost inaudible. The others will never respect me. They saw me carrying toolkits, cleaning oil stains. To them I was just ground crew. Hayes leaned forward, her gaze unyielding. Respect was earned the moment you put an F-16 down in terrain where even a helicopter hesitates. You guided a rescue team to a living pilot when everyone else assumed him dead. That credibility speaks louder than any rank on your sleeve. Raina breathed out slowly, caught between resistance and the undeniable truth in Hayes's words. The legend she had buried refused to stay hidden. To deny it now would be to let the knowledge die with her. Accepting meant carrying the weight forward, not for herself, but for those who would face the same impossible skies. The classroom at Nellis Test School was filled with pilots who had once walked past Raina Vasquez without a second glance. Now they sat in rigid silence, flight suits pressed, notebooks open, while she stood at the front of the room. The projector lit her face in pale glow. A slide behind her, reading simply, Advanced Emergency Procedures. Her voice was calm, steady, stripped of anything performative. She spoke in precise terms about impossible landings, about thinking beyond protocol, when a life hung in the balance. Not once did she raise her tone. Yet the silence in the room told her the message carried more weight than any lecture they had ever endured. These were the same men who once called her wrench turner. Now they were her students. Word spread quickly. They called it Silent Hawk School, never officially but always with quiet respect. Stories of her training circulated far beyond Nellis. A pilot in Korea landed on a rough stretch of highway to save a wingman. Another in Alaska guided a damaged jet onto frozen terrain. Each time, when asked how they had dared, the answer was the same Silent Hawk taught us. Legends did not fade. They echoed, reshaped into lessons whispered across units. Raina never claimed credit. She only kept teaching, methodical, calm, never seeking recognition. 2 years later, she stood at the podium of the Air Force Academy graduation. Before her sat 400 newly commissioned officers, faces young, eager, and carrying the same hidden fears she had once carried. Her uniform was crisp, her voice reflective, stripped of any flourish. She told them of Sarah Chen, of the day she lost her wingman and nearly lost herself. She spoke of hiding in coveralls on a desert flight line, believing she no longer deserved to fly. And she spoke of the moment she heard a Mayday call and chose to remember who she was. The hall was silent, cadets leaning forward in hushed awe. Afterward, a young cadet lingered, hand trembling as he finally spoke. "Ma'am, what if I freeze when it matters? What if I fail when someone is counting on me?" Raina placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "Fear does not make you unworthy," she told him. "Fear makes you human. The best pilots are the ones who feel it and fly anyway, because someone else's life depends on them." The cadet nodded, a weight lifting, and Raina saw herself in his eyes. That evening, driving away from the academy, she pulled her car to the roadside. The sun had dropped low, painting the sky in quiet gold. She stared at her phone before dialing a number she had avoided for years. When Sarah Chen's father answered, Raina's voice carried both grief and resolve. "This is Raina Vasquez. I was Sarah's wingman. I wanted you to know I'm flying again, and I'll make sure her sacrifice carries forward. Never underestimate the quiet ones. They may carry the whole sky, waiting for the moment it is needed.